B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Friday, November 2nd, 2018. We have mixed emotions of relief around the corner, knowing that the midterm elections may provide some incremental change. But it's not going to change Trump's behavior. The chaos, the fear-mongering, and the desperate lies that are being spread at a record clip. And it is relentless. It's hard to keep up with it all. I don't follow Trump on Twitter, so I wait for the media to report his tweets to me. And yesterday, he held an impromptu press event before he flew off to another one of his mob rallies, where he offered a rambling, word salad that really was quite apocalyptic. And we know Trump is faking all this. Or is he? Is he the victim of this invasion that is on the way, the caravan from Central America? And is he really so scared that he has to deploy, we heard 5,000, 8,000, 9,000, 15,000, a million? I mean, how many troops is he going to put on the border to confront these unarmed, poverty-stricken refugees who seek comfort in the United States? And his anger toward them, the way he is sowing division, and that's the key phrase that our intelligence community uses to describe Russian meddling. But Trump is actively sowing this kind of division, trying to separate people by birthright citizenship, lying about the threat presented by this caravan, sending troops to the border. And we know that the Republican Party has preserved the ugly status quo regarding immigration and immigration regulation. And instead of addressing even a single aspect of it, they'd prefer to leave it the way it is, let it fester, use it as a political tool. And they don't care about the thousands, if not millions of people whose lives are negatively impacted as a result. They clearly don't care about the psychological abuse of the immigrants and especially the children. When they face this kind of rhetoric and the threat of tent cities along the border, the end of asylum or sharply curtailing it to the point that it's meaningless. And so Trump calls it a crisis. He refers to it as an invasion. This inflammatory language is like the boy who cried wolf. What if we have a real crisis? Now, I don't know anybody who's about to invade the United States in any way. But this shows how unhinged he is and how unsuitable he is for the job that he is currently holding. Now, here's the most egregious comment he made yesterday. He said that he has issued an order to troops to respond to any migrants in the caravan who throw rocks as if they were brandishing a firearm. I told them, consider it a rifle. Now, has he been talking to Bibi Netanyahu? Setting up sniper lines in Gaza? That's the only image I can imagine because we have not seen a situation where a migrant or a group of migrants used stones as weapons. Now, I'm sure there's been an odd case along the border where there's been an altercation and the only available weapon was a rock. But this is, that's as anecdotal as the Willie Horton-style ad that Trump released yesterday. We've learned more about Luis Bracamontes. Yes, he's a crazy guy. Yes, he was an illegal immigrant from Mexico. Yes, he's been convicted of killing 2 police officers. Rush Limbaugh was working the case over again this morning, adding a little gasoline to the fire, saying that before the cops picked him up, that Bracamontes had shot 5 times into the face of an African American while using the N-word. Now, that's a single case, but it is used to smear everybody who is trying to enter this country, legally or otherwise, from the South. Because they're all brown, they're all dangerous, they're all murderers and rapists. That's the way Trump spins this up. And unfortunately, there are many Americans who lap it up. And so, as Trump lumbered through this event yesterday, he claimed there's going to be this executive order and that executive order, but this is all posturing before the election, and I don't doubt that he'll pursue some of these after the election. But in his remarks yesterday, for example, he said 97% of immigrants do not show up for their trials. But depending on which group you look at, asylum seekers come to their trials over 90% of the time. In some cases, 99%, again, depending which category you look at. And on a broad basis, only 28% of people who are ordered to immigration court don't show up. There is no basis for the 97% figure. He repeated his oft-stated misleading description of the situation at the southern border, saying a large organized caravan is heading toward the United States with tough people, a lot of young men, strong men, and a lot of men we maybe don't want in our country. Well, it's because they're brown. He never quite says that, but that is the message that is picked up through the dog whistles, and there are a whole lot of dogs out there listening to those whistles. And at the Washington Post, Greg Sargent writes, Trump has now served up a grand total of 6,420 lies and misleading statements as president. The dishonesty has escalated dramatically in the run-up to the midterms, and virtually all of the lies and distortions are ones that Trump has repeated before. But at his rally in Missouri last night, Trump said this: the Democrats want to continue giving automatic birthright citizenship to every child born to an illegal alien, even if they've been on our soil for a mere matter of seconds. Hundreds of thousands of children born to illegal immigrants are made automatic citizens of the United States every year because of this crazy lunatic policy. No, it is the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, and it wasn't inserted by Democrats. He went on, and they're all made instantly eligible for every privilege and benefit of American citizenship. All of you get nothing more than they do. This is sowing division. This is creating a class mentality. This is telling the people at his rallies, you're better than these other people, and I'm going to make sure that you get your due and they don't get, well, anything if he can help it. Then he hit the whopper. They're full citizens, the birthright children, and it's costing us many, many billions of dollars a year. That is a pure fabrication. There is no statistic that supports that. Now, to his credit, former Republican Senator and former Defense Secretary under Obama, Chuck Hagel, a guy I don't particularly care for, last night he told the truth. It's clear to me that Trump is using our military and our troops in a very political way. It really casts a lot of questions about the competency of his leadership. As a former soldier, I know the kinds of sacrifices these men and women are involved with every day, and their families. And to use them as political pawns, as a complete fabrication, is really wrong. Hagel also said he felt disgust in response to Trump's suggestion during the remarks at the White House that the U.S. military could fire on members of the caravan if the migrants throw rocks at them. That's a wanton incitement of unnecessary violence, Hagel said. It's a distraction, a distortion. It is of rank political purpose to use our military like this. Not in my lifetime have I ever heard those kinds of words from a president of the United States. And former Joint Chiefs head Martin Dempsey, a retired Army general, said, a wasteful deployment of overstretched soldiers and Marines would be made much worse if they use force disproportional to the threat they face, and they won't. Now, Trump imagines that all of this is aimed at a domestic audience. But people watch the United States from all over the world. I enjoy an audience of listeners in 70 countries to this podcast. And I imagine some of the news that people get in the far corners of the world comes from this podcast. I don't know. Don't worry. I don't imagine it's everybody. I just imagine there are some. And so in Nigeria, where the army brutally slaughtered as many as 49 protesters of the Islamic movement of Nigeria when they marched in the capital of Abuja last week. Now, the army disputes this. They say the death toll was 6. But they are now rationalizing and defending their actions. Over at the U.S. Embassy in Nigeria today, one of the generals said, not only did they use stones, referring to the protesters, but they were carrying petrol bombs, machetes, and knives. So yes, we consider them as being armed. We intervened only because those members are trying to harm our people. Hey, they even burned a police vehicle. That's their justification. And they are looking to Trump as a model to sell this slaughter to their own citizens. Oh, it's so disgusting. And a new poll shows that Trump's efforts to sow division by claiming that his words did not incite the pipe bomber or the truck driver who massacred 11 people at the Jewish synagogue in Pittsburgh last Saturday. No, he has no responsibility for that. It is the fake news media that he blames. And you know what? This bullshit appears to be working to Trump's benefit. Because in a new poll that was taken after the massacre in Pittsburgh, and this is a Washington Post ABC poll, so it's fairly legitimate, finds that 49% of registered voters say Trump encourages politically motivated violence. 47% say the media encourage politically motivated violence in the way they report the news. When you break it down, 76% of Democrats say Trump is encouraging politically motivated violence. 69% of Republicans say the very same about the news media. The only hope is that independents will lean toward the truth, and the poll shows that a quarter of independents trust neither party, 41% trust Democrats, 24% trust Republicans more in terms of reducing the nation's divisions. But get this. While almost half of voters believe that Trump's rhetoric and media coverage are encouraging violence, 16% fault both Trump and the media. 33% of voters say Trump, but not the media, is encouraging violence, and 32% say the media, but not Trump, are encouraging violence. That's right down the middle on so many of these issues. And I imagine if you listen to me, you share my perspective. There is no doubt in my mind that the attempted violence of the pipe bomber and the indescribable and despicable violence of Bowers in Pittsburgh were at least indirectly, if not directly, stimulated by Donald Trump and his angry rhetoric and his daily tweets. But denial is working. That is the scariest finding I have for you today. Here's potentially good news. In 18 states and the District of Columbia, the advance vote counts, people who've already voted early, surpassed the total vote count of the last midterm election. In 2016, 47 million people voted early in the presidential cycle. There were 27 million who voted early in 2014. But this year's advance vote count has already exceeded the count from 2014. Professor of Political Science, University of Florida, Michael McDonald, we're in uncharted territory with the size of this vote. In some states, it's closer to the presidential election than to the 2014 midterm. So, that's mildly encouraging, but we don't know if those people have been motivated to vote by Trump or by their revulsion of Trump. And we won't find out until next week. In some cases, it'll take longer. I don't expect to have everything neatly wrapped up on election night. We've been speculating that Jeff Sessions may be pushed off the island at the after the midterm elections are concluded. And it appears that Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke might get the boot, too. Trump is increasingly concerned about the Inspector General's report that Zinke has broken rules while serving at the Interior Department. You remember on his first day of work, he rode in on a horse in Washington, D.C. Will he ride out on a horse? Well, we'll find out. It relates to a deal with some people in Whitefish, Montana, where Zinke and his wife own some property, and this land development deal has raised red flags. So we'll see how that turns out. Zinke survived a brush with extinction by getting past some claims that he had abused his travel privileges and racked up private jet charters and that sort of thing. And Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, had the same problem, but he has weathered that. He now is answering questions about what happens if the Democrats take control of the House and use a little-known power from a 1920s law that enables them to ask the Treasury Department and the Internal Revenue Service for anybody's tax returns. Now, we're told that Trump's tax returns are kept in a vault over at the Treasury headquarters. And Mnuchin says, well, they haven't taken the House back yet, but if they do, I will probably honor their request. Now, it's not clear if those would ever be made public. The law allows members of congressional committees to review the returns. And meanwhile, a federal judge in Maryland has ordered the trial of a case related to Trump's alleged violations of the emoluments clause of the Constitution. That case will go forward. The Justice Department had asked that it be put on hold while the president acts presidential, and the court has said no. Now, 8 countries are going to be exempted from the sanctions that are being imposed on Iran, effective this Sunday and Monday. And this is occurring while Americans are distracted by all the domestic hoo-ha. But it's a serious move that could ratchet up tensions and lead to war. And this is what Israel wants. They want us to take Iran to the woodshed and reduce the power and influence they have in the region. So these sanctions, which are being imposed on a number of government officials and entities in Iran, there will be 8 countries exempted, but we don't know who they are yet. Speculation is that South Korea, Japan, and India are the top of the list. Mike Pompeo, playing Secretary of State, said it won't be the European Union. Turkey says it has been granted a waiver. And so we'll see how all this plays out. And the bizarre thing is that Trump tweeted a selfie with himself framed by a poster that looks a lot like the fonts that are used for the titles on Game of Thrones. And the depiction was, "Sanctions are coming." And that is a play on "Winter is Coming," which refers to a coming deep freeze when an army of the magical warriors descend from the north, the White Walkers, to wipe out all kingdoms. Now, that is a really bizarre thing for a president to do. I'm not the deepest Game of Thrones fan, but it's just really, really strange. And there's good commentary about the sanctions over at consortiumnews.com today. I've linked to Patrick Lawrence's commentary, and what he notes is that while the U.S. intention is to isolate Iran, it is the U.S. that could wind up being much more isolated, and by pushing Iran, we also may move them off the dollar, the petrodollar, which long-term is not in the interests of the United States and could empower Russia and China, as our friend Pepe Escobar predicted a few months ago in an in-depth interview podcast right here. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. Let's see who's on the list today. John Morgan, Patrick Gray, Steve Wazinski, Judy Holloway, they each kick in the princely sum of $5 a month. Could you do it? I'll bet you could. And if you can't, I don't want you to. But if you can, visit peterbcollins.com. Click on the menu tab, click on Become a Subscriber. You'll land on the sign-up page where you can make an easy choice, $5, $10, $20 a month, the $50 annual subscription, which earns you the bonus gift And that's John Dist's new rock and roll CD called American University. Well, I received notification that tomorrow, Saturday, the 3rd of November, there is an urgent global meeting to discuss the future of Julian Assange. This email came in today. An alarming series of occurrences have unfolded this week, I don't know what they are, that indicate serious urgent threats to the physical well-being of WikiLeaks publisher Julian Assange. Those close to the publisher are swiftly moving to address the recent escalations, and there is a big international conference call at noontime Pacific on Saturday. And today, the New York Times published 2 articles about speculation of WikiLeaks being the recipient of Russian-hacked emails. This is the part that has never been proven. I, of course, remain skeptical about whether Russia actually hacked the DNC or it was an insider. But the latest speculation relates to Roger Stone, his communications with Steve Bannon and people at Breitbart News during the 2016 campaign in late September, early October. And they published these emails that really are not conclusive, but they are suggestive that Roger Stone knew in advance that the document dumps would be coming. And Roger Stone, in a kind of Three Stooges way, says, no, it was this comic, Randy Credico, who told me all this, and Credico denies it. So what we don't know is what any of these people have testified before the Robert Mueller grand jury or told his investigators. And the New York Times doesn't shed any light on that, but they published a lot of words that don't add up to very much, in my humble opinion. And similarly, over at BuzzFeed today, the article is headlined, "Once the midterms are over, expect to hear from Robert Mueller again." And Chris Geidner goes into interesting speculation. But along the way, he adds these important disclaimers. Many of the indictments, as Trump supporters and Peter B. Collins point out, actually relate to foreign actors, to actions allegedly taken before the Trump campaign existed, or to lies that the individuals charged are alleged to have told investigators. While it's true that none of the charges have been against the Trump campaign staff for allegations that they took illegal actions as part of their campaign efforts, some of the allegations made by Mueller or other federal prosecutors have referenced contact or attempts to contact between Russian officials or agents and members of the Trump campaign. So they're really trying to keep this alive, even as they admit passively that these convictions so far that Mueller has are not related to the original claim of Russian meddling in the election. And I remain persuadable if evidence and convictions that really do prove that surface. But they do a lot of speculation based on who has been coming in and out of the Mueller offices, including Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen. And I'm sure that the investigation continues. But I remain to be persuaded that it has any real significance. I want to commend Sam Biddle at The Intercept. He was very enterprising, and he went into Facebook, and he went through the process of setting up an ad. I don't even know what the ad was for. But when you advertise on Facebook, you get to select the kind of people you want to see this ad. And there are hundreds of little tabs that you can pick. You know, white people who like mayonnaise, African Americans who like grits. I mean, the list is endless. So they posted an ad, and they chose as one of the filters, white genocide conspiracy theory. And that is part of the detailed targeting criterion on the social network. They used it to promote articles to an interest group that Facebook pegged at 168,000 users. Wow, really? White genocide conspiracy theory has 168,000 fans? This is amazing. So they posted the ad, they paid for it. Then they contacted Facebook for comment. Facebook promptly deleted the targeting category, apologized, said it never should have existed in the first place. But how many other dark targeting tags are still available at Facebook today and being used to target and misinform voters in the midterm elections. I don't know the answer, but I don't think it is zero. Meanwhile, on the earnings call earlier this week, Facebook told the investors and the analysts that they are in transition, and their vision for the future is to downplay the news feed. Now, for me, the news feed is what matters at Facebook. My Facebook friends, including many of you listeners, link me up to important stories that I wouldn't see because I'm only one guy and there's only so much I can do to gather the news. And I truly value that. That's what makes Facebook useful to me. And so they see their future in cat pictures and brunch photos and stuff like that. Meanwhile, they, of course, continue to purge independent media outlets for unexplained reasons. Last night, we were in San Francisco. It was a beautiful evening. We went to the Museum of Modern Art, had a great time. But the whole neighborhood there south of Market was filled with pickets. And the Marriott Corporation, which has a Marriott-branded hotel and 5 or 6 others with different brands, is facing a huge strike by Unite Here, and that's the union that represents the maids and other staff members of these hotels. And I was touched by the signs they were carrying, which is, one job should be enough. And it points out that at $12 or $15 an hour, these housekeepers and other employees cannot survive on a single job. And even the scabs are complaining. They're bussing in people from towns like Salinas and Modesto, where it's a 2-hour bus ride in each direction. And these people the scabs are being paid $17 an hour, but only 2 hours of travel time, when it's at least 4 hours a day. That's just an example of how these brutal employers operate. And this comes as we get the latest jobs and earnings report from the Labor Department. And it shows that tightening employment has started to cause wages to trickle up a little bit. Now, 3% is basically the standard raise that people get when times are just kind of normal. But we have record corporate profits, and the wage increases are moving up very, very slowly. And most Americans are waiting for their share of this largesse to trickle down to them. And I do believe that this is mostly due to Obama's hard work to rescue the economy. But Trump, of course, is taking credit for it. Now, the Federal Reserve is moving to remove the regulations from Dodd-Frank and other moves that were put in place, the Volcker Rule in particular, after the 2008 meltdown at Wall Street. And they're paving the way for the next crash. This is so short-sighted, and it just shows that they believe that Wall Street can regulate itself. And you and I know that that is bullshit. But over at the Federal Reserve, they have loosened the regulations for operators like Capital One and Charles Schwab, whose assets are under $700 billion. They are weakening the Volcker Rule, which is the amount of cash cushion that banks essentially have to maintain. Elizabeth Warren describes this as a favor from Wall Street's banker buddies turned regulators. And it is just more of the business as usual that leaves you and me vulnerable to another serious crash. I want to thank The Guardian for publishing a list of the top 20 political donors in this election cycle. And what we learn is that many of them are Democrats. I'm just going to run through this real quickly. There's a link if you'd like to read the details. It's in the show file at peterbcollins.com. The top donors this cycle at $113 million are the casino couple from Las Vegas, Sheldon and Miriam Adelson. The number 2 donor is Tom Steyer and his wife Catherine Taylor here in San Francisco, $50.7 million. Then conservatives Richard and Elizabeth Uline donating $39 million to mostly Republican groups, followed closely by Michael Bloomberg, who is kicking in $38 million. I didn't say billion there, did I? $38 million to mostly Democratic candidates and PACs. Donald Sussman is a liberal who is kicking in $22 million. I don't know too much about him. He ran a hedge fund. James Simon is a liberal who's kicking in $19 million. George Soros, $17 million. The Schwartzmans are on the right over there at Blackstone Group. They are donating about $13 million to Republicans. Fred Eichaner, a man I've never heard of, a Chicago media entrepreneur who owns the progressive radio station there, WCPT. He is investing $12 million. Conservative Kenneth and Ann Griffin, $11 million. The Bezos, who are donating their money to what they say are nonpartisan groups, $10 million. The Mellons from Pittsburgh, Timothy Mellon, $10 million. Deborah Simon, a liberal from Indiana, is kicking in about $9 million. Founder of LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman, $8 million. Most to Democrats, but also $10,000 to the Republican Party in Massachusetts. Can't explain that. George and Judith Marcus, liberals, $8.1 million. Relatives, these are not related, but their name is Marcus. Bernard Marcus and his wife, Bernie, is the co-founder of Home Depot, and they're spending $8 million on conservatives. Then there's Chuck Schwab of the Schwab Bank I mentioned a moment ago, $7.2 million to conservative candidates. Carla Jurvetson, $7 million to liberals. Paul Scott, S-K-J-O-D-T, giving $6 million to liberals. And finally, Ronald and Nina Cameron, $6.5 million to conservatives. Finally today, a whistleblower here in California, who is the top psychiatrist employed by the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, has blown the whistle. And he has told the federal judge who oversees the health department of the prisons. They've been under federal court jurisdiction for over 10 years now, and Judge Kimberly Mueller has succeeded the legendary Thelton Henderson in monitoring the prison health care system. And the whistleblower, Michael Golding, has told the court that there are serious problems where the prison insists on manipulating the data to make it appear that they are providing adequate psychiatry for prisoners in the California system. And the most gruesome example of what has occurred as a result is a woman who got care that was so shoddy that she plucked her own eye out, popped it in her mouth, and swallowed it. And this woman had, she had been treated at times by a psychologist, not a psychiatrist. The psychologist couldn't order the medication that might have prevented the breakdown or the outburst, where she was screaming every 15 minutes. They would not let her see the psychiatrist on duty, and her reaction was to writhe on the floor, remove her own eyeball, and eat it. That's really gruesome. And I'm ashamed as a Californian that is occurring in prisons in my state. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment. Ran a little long today, but gosh, there's so much to cover. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.